Footsteps echoed against the polished marble of the upscale Copley Place Mall, but Carly only heard the rapid, terrifying thud of her own heartbeat. Fingers dug into her fragile arm, twisting with brutal familiarity. Arthur's hot, venomous breath grazed her ear, promising absolute hell. Passing shoppers quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to see the terrified woman being forcefully dragged toward the nearest service exit. But someone else was watching, a man who owned the very shadows of Boston. Derek Jordan stepped directly into their path. His dark gaze didn't hold mere anger. It held an executioner's absolute promise. Slowly, methodically, the most feared syndicate boss on the East Coast began to remove his heavy gold rings. Fluorescent lights combined with the natural sun streaming through the glass atrium of Copley Place should have felt warm. But Carly Sinclair only felt exposed. She adjusted the collar of her cream-colored cashmere sweater, a habitual movement born from years of hiding bruises that had long since faded into pale, uneven scars. It had been 8 months since she fled the sprawling, suffocating estate in Connecticut. 8 months since she changed her number, blocked every mutual acquaintance, and filed the divorce papers that Arthur stubbornly, violently refused to acknowledge. "You're doing that thing again," Sarah said, lightly bumping her shoulder against Carly's as they navigated past a high-end designer boutique. Sarah Jennings was a whirlwind of energy, a graphic designer who had taken Carly in when she arrived in Boston with nothing but a duffel bag and a fractured rib. "Doing what?" Carly murmured, her green eyes darting toward the reflection in the store windows, constantly scanning the crowd. "Turtling, pulling your neck in, hiding in your clothes. Carly, you're safe here. Boston is a big city. Arthur is stuck in Hartford, probably screaming at his golf caddy or throwing a temper tantrum in a boardroom. He doesn't know you're here." Carly offered a weak, trembling smile, though her stomach twisted into tight knots. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a corporate bully. He was a master manipulator with deep pockets and a terrifyingly fragile ego. He came from old New England money, the kind of wealth that bribed police chiefs and paid off domestic disturbance calls before they ever reached a dispatch radio. To Arthur, Carly wasn't a wife. She was a possession, a beautiful bird he had trapped in a gilded cage, and he took immense pleasure in plucking her feathers whenever he felt a loss of control in his own miserable life. "I know," Carly lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, the anniversary of the day I left is coming up. My nerves are entirely shot. Every time I see a silver Mercedes, I stop breathing." Sarah stopped walking and gently took Carly's hands, forcing her to pause in the middle of the busy concourse. "Look at me. You survived. You have a job at the gallery now. You have your own apartment lease starting next month. You are completely rebuilding your life. Don't let the ghost of that pathetic excuse for a man ruin a perfectly good Saturday shopping trip." Taking a deep, shaky breath, Carly nodded. She wanted to believe Sarah. She desperately wanted to believe that the nightmares would eventually stop, that the phantom feeling of Arthur's hands wrapping around her throat would finally dissipate. "Okay. You're right. I'm sorry. Let's go get that coffee at Tata. Let's go get that." They resumed their walk, blending into the sea of affluent weekend shoppers. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and roasted espresso. For a fleeting 20 minutes, as they browsed through an indie bookstore and laughed over a ridiculous pair of avant-garde sunglasses, Carly actually felt normal. She felt like a 26-year-old woman enjoying the city, rather than a fugitive running from her own marriage certificate. But survival instincts are a curse. They are honed in the fires of trauma, and they never truly shut off. As they stepped out of a boutique on the second level, a subtle shift in the atmosphere made the hairs on the back of Carly's neck stand up. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling a sudden, plunging drop in temperature in her own veins. She stopped dead in her tracks, the shopping bag in her hand slipping slightly. "Carly?" Sarah asked, turning around. "Did you forget your card in the store?" Carly couldn't speak. Her vocal cords were paralyzed. Across the wide atrium, standing near the glass railing by the escalators, was a figure in a tailored navy suit. His posture was rigidly arrogant, his slicked-back blonde hair catching the overhead lights. He was speaking intensely into his cell phone, his free hand aggressively gesturing in the air. Arthur. He was here. In Boston. In the exact same mall. Panic, absolute and blinding, flooded Carly's system. Her vision tunneled. The chatter of the hundreds of people around them faded into a muted, ringing static. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, following Carly's terrified gaze. "Is that—" "We need to leave," Carly gasped, her chest heaving as she immediately backed away, trying to use a large structural pillar as cover. "Sarah, we need to leave right now. Don't look at him. Walk toward the service elevators, not the main exit." Okay, just breathe. I'm right beside you," Sarah said, her own voice trembling as she linked her arm tightly through Carly's. They turned sharply, abandoning their route to the cafe, and walked briskly toward the northern corridor of the mall, where the foot traffic thinned out near the high-end jewelry stores. Every step felt like walking through thick mud. Carly's heart hammered violently against her ribs. How did he find me? She thought wildly. Did someone talk? Did he hire a private investigator? She dared a glance over her shoulder. The spot by the glass railing was completely empty. Arthur was gone. Relief hadn't even begun to wash over her, before a heavy, manicured hand clamped down onto her left shoulder, its grip like a steel vice. "Hello, darling." A smooth, venomous voice purred directly into her ear. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" 4 floors above the chaotic retail concourse, isolated behind tinted, bulletproof glass, Derek Jordan sat in the shadows of an opulent private office. The room belonged to the owner of the luxury mall, but today it belonged to Derek. He leaned back in a dark leather chair, a crystal tumbler of neat scotch resting loosely in his right hand. Derek was a man sculpted by violence and refined by immense power. At 34, he was the undisputed head of the Jordan Syndicate, an organization that controlled the underground logistics, shipping ports, and shadow economies from South Boston all the way to Providence. He didn't look like a street thug. He looked like a European royal going to a funeral. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit, his dark, unruly hair fell slightly over deep-set, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "The waterfront properties have been secured, boss," Lorenzo Enzo Bianchi, Derek's underboss and closest confidant, said as he reviewed a tablet. Enzo stood by the door, a hulking figure with a jagged scar running along his jawline. "The mayor's office signed off on the permits this morning. The front company is entirely legitimate on paper." "Good," Derek replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant obedience. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze drifting toward the bank of security monitors mounted on the far wall. The screens displayed dozens of high-definition feeds from the mall below. "And the Hartford situation?" Enzo paused, tapping a few buttons on his tablet. "Pendleton Holdings is bleeding out, exactly as you ordered. We severed their supply chains in the Pacific Northwest, and our people in the financial district shorted his stocks. Arthur Pendleton is hemorrhaging money. The banks are getting ready to call in his loans. He's desperate, Derek. But—" Enzo hesitated. Derek's dark eyes shifted from the monitors to his underboss. "But what?" "Our tails lost him this morning. Pendleton drove his car into a private garage in Hartford and didn't come out. We think he switched vehicles. He's off the grid." The tumbler in Derek's hand suddenly stopped mid-air. The atmosphere in the office grew suffocatingly dense, heavy with a sudden, lethal tension. You lost him. Only for a few hours. We have guys checking the toll cameras now. Derek set the glass down on the mahogany desk with a sharp clack. He stood up, towering at 6'3", his broad shoulders blocking the light from the window. Find him, Enzo. Now. Derek's obsession with Arthur Pendleton had nothing to do with business. It had everything to do with the woman Pendleton had broken. 9 months ago, Derek had attended a miserable charity gala in Connecticut, a necessary evil to keep up his legitimate appearances. He had stepped out onto a secluded balcony to smoke a cigar when he heard the muffled sound of a woman crying. Through the darkness, he had watched Arthur Pendleton violently shove his wife against a stone balustrade, his hands gripping her upper arms tight enough to snap bone, hissing vile insults into her face before leaving her trembling in the cold. Derek, a man who dealt in death and destruction daily, had felt an unfamiliar, blinding rage ignite in his chest. He had watched the woman, Carly, sink to the ground, her emerald eyes completely devoid of hope, beautiful but utterly shattered. He hadn't intervened that night. Starting a public bloodbath at a high society gala would have drawn the FBI to his doorstep. But he had watched her. He had learned everything about her. When Carly finally found the courage to run to Boston a month later, it was Derek's shadow operatives who quietly ensured her bus ticket couldn't be traced. It was Derek who anonymously bought the art gallery building where she currently worked, instructing the manager to hire her immediately. He had woven an invisible, impenetrable web of protection around her, entirely from a distance. He was a monster, he knew that. A man bathed in blood had no right to touch a woman like her, but he would be damned if he let another monster hurt her ever again. "Boss!" Enzo's voice suddenly cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. He was pointing at the center security monitor. "Camera 4B, the second-level north corridor." Derek's head snapped toward the screens. His heart, which normally beat at a slow or icy rhythm even in the middle of a gunfight, suddenly stopped. On the screen, rendered in crisp high definition, was Carly. She was backing away from a pillar, looking terrified, and stepping directly into her path, his hand gripping her shoulder with brutal force, was Arthur Pendleton. Derek didn't say a word. The silence that fell over the office was heavier than a concrete vault. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't wait for Enzo. He simply turned and walked out the door, his strides long, purposeful, and radiating a terrifying, apocalyptic calm. Enzo dropped the tablet and immediately drew the suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster, sprinting after his boss. He had known Derek Jordan for 15 years, but he had never seen the look that was currently in the boss's eyes. It was the look of a man who was about to tear the world apart with his bare hands. Panic is a paralyzing poison. It freezes the lungs and turns the legs to lead. When Arthur's hand clamped down on Carly's shoulder, a whimper tore from her throat. A pathetic, helpless sound that she instantly hated herself for making. "Arthur, let go of me," Carly choked out, trying to wrench her body away. But his grip was relentless, his fingers digging into the exact same spots he used to bruise with frightening regularity. "You really thought you were clever, didn't you? You ungrateful little bitch," Arthur sneered, leaning in close. His breath smelled of stale liquor and peppermint. "Running away like a thief in the night, taking my dignity with you. Do you have any idea how much money you've cost me? How many people have been laughing behind my back? Hey, back off!" Sarah yelled, stepping forward and shoving Arthur's chest. Arthur didn't even flinch. He backhanded Sarah across the face with his free hand. The loud, sickening crack echoed through the corridor. Sarah stumbled backward, crying out as she hit the floor, her cheek instantly swelling red. "Sarah!" Carly screamed, thrashing wildly now. "Let me go! Somebody help!" A few shoppers stopped, their eyes widening in shock. A woman gasped, pulling her child away. A businessman took a step forward, cell phone in hand, but Arthur shot him a venomous, psychotic glare. "Mind your own damn business! This is my wife!" Arthur roared at the crowd. The businessman faltered, stepping back into the safety of the herd. People whispered. People pointed. No one intervened. "You're coming home with me right now," Arthur hissed, his face inches from Carly's, his spittle hitting her cheek. "And when we get behind closed doors, you're going to learn exactly what happens to wives who embarrass me." He yanked her violently, nearly lifting her off her feet as he dragged her toward the heavy fire exit doors at the end of the hall. Carly dug her heels into the polished floor, fighting with every ounce of strength she had. But she was no match for him. Tears blurred her vision. This is it, she thought, a suffocating despair crashing over her. He's going to kill me this time. Let her go. The voice wasn't a shout. It wasn't loud. It was a low, resonant command that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the mall. It possessed a terrifying authority that instantly silenced the whispers of the onlookers. Arthur stopped dragging Carly and turned, an arrogant sneer twisting his lips. "I said mind your own." The words died in his throat. The crowd had naturally, almost instinctually, parted like the Red Sea. Standing 20 feet away, walking with slow, deliberate steps, was Derek Jordan. He didn't look like a good Samaritan stepping in to help. He looked like the Grim Reaper wearing a $5,000 suit. His dark eyes were fixed solely on Arthur, completely ignoring the whispering crowd, the security guards running toward them in the distance, and the absolute chaos of the situation. Enzo walked 2 paces behind him, his hand resting casually inside his jacket, a silent warning to anyone who even thought about interfering. "Who the hell are you?" Arthur demanded, though his voice lacked its previous bravado. He tightened his grip on Carly, pulling her slightly in front of him like a human shield. Derek didn't answer. He continued his slow, methodical approach. 10 feet. 8 feet. As he walked, Derek raised his hands. On his fingers were 3 heavy, custom-made gold rings, symbols of his status, his wealth, and his absolute authority in the criminal underworld. Clink. Derek slid the first ring off his right index finger. He didn't look back as he dropped it. Enzo perfectly caught the heavy gold band in his palm. "I'm warning you," Arthur stammered, taking a step back, dragging a sobbing Carly with him. "I know the police commissioner. I will ruin you." Clink. The second ring, a massive signet bearing the Jordan family crest, slid off Derek's middle finger. Enzo caught it. The metallic sound echoed sharply against the marble walls, sounding exactly like the tolling of a funeral bell. Derek stopped 3 feet away from them. The sheer, suffocating aura of danger radiating from him made Carly's breath hitch. She looked up through her tear-soaked lashes, meeting his gaze for a fraction of a second. The absolute rage in his eyes terrified her, but strangely, underneath it, she saw a flicker of something else. Reassurance, a promise that she was safe. Clink. The final ring slid from his left hand. Enzo pocketed all 3 and took a single step back, giving his boss room to work. Derek looked Arthur dead in the eyes. "Take your hands off her." Arthur, blinded by a toxic mix of fear and inherited arrogance, puffed out his chest. "She's my wife. I can do whatever the hell I want with—" The movement was so fast, it defied human biology. Derek didn't throw a punch. He didn't grapple. His right hand shot forward like a striking viper, his fingers gripping Arthur's throat with the crushing force of an industrial hydraulic press. He didn't just grab him. He hoisted Arthur completely off his feet, driving him backward into the reinforced glass window of the nearest storefront with a thunderous crash that cracked the thick pane. Arthur's hand instantly released Carly as he desperately clawed at the iron grip, strangling the life out of him. Carly stumbled forward, gasping for air, instantly falling to her knees beside Sarah, who was just sitting up. Arthur gagged, his legs kicking wildly in the air. His face turned a deep, mottled purple. "You don't own her," Derek whispered, his voice dark and raspy, meant only for Arthur to hear as the man choked on his own swollen tongue. "You don't even have the right to breathe the same air as her. If I ever see your face in my city again, I won't just kill you. I will dismantle you piece by piece, and I will feed what's left to the harbor." Derek's grip tightened just a fraction more, waiting until Arthur's eyes rolled backward and his frantic struggling weakened into pathetic twitches. Only then did Derek release him. Arthur collapsed onto the marble floor like a sack of broken bricks, violently gasping and coughing, desperately sucking oxygen into his bruised windpipe. He scrambled backward like a beaten dog, clutching his throat, too terrified to even look at the monster standing over him. Derek smoothly adjusted the cuffs of his pristine shirt, unbothered by the violence he had just inflicted. He didn't spare Arthur another glance. Instead, he slowly turned his attention to the woman kneeling on the floor. He knelt down on one knee, ignoring the expensive fabric of his trousers dragging against the marble. The cold, lethal killer vanished, replaced by a man holding his breath. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering just an inch from Carly's trembling shoulder, silently asking for permission before he finally let his fingers gently brush against her sleeve. "Are you hurt?" Derek asked, his voice suddenly impossibly soft, a stark, jarring contrast to the brutal violence he had just committed. Carly looked up at him, her chest heaving, her mind struggling to process the storm that had just ripped through them all. She looked at the man who had just dismantled her worst nightmare in less than 5 seconds. Who are you?" she whispered. Derek held her gaze, feeling the chains of his own dark world tightening around his chest. "Someone who is never going to let him touch you again. Chaos usually breeds interference." But as Derek Jordan stood up, offering his hand to Carly, a bizarre calmness settled over the second floor of Copley Place. Security guards, who should have been rushing the scene, were conveniently detained by men in sharp suits, flashing unreadable credentials. Shoppers gave them a wide berth, intuitively understanding that the apex predator in the room had claimed his territory. Carly stared at Derek's extended hand. His knuckles were slightly red from gripping Arthur's throat, yet his palm was steady. She reached out, her trembling fingers brushing against his warm skin. He pulled her up with effortless grace, his touch shockingly gentle. "Enzo," Derek said, not breaking eye contact with Carly. "Already on it, boss," Enzo replied, hoisting Sarah up by her uninjured arm. "Car is waiting at the south exit. We have a clear path." "My purse," Carly stammered, her mind scrambling to hold on to mundane details to avoid a complete mental collapse. "I dropped it." Derek snapped his fingers. Another man in a tailored suit materialized from the crowd, scooped up Carly's fallen bag, and nodded respectfully before melting back into the perimeter. "Walk with me," Derek murmured, stepping close enough that Carly could smell his cologne, a heady mix of cedarwood and expensive scotch. "Keep your eyes on my back. Do not look at anyone else." Carly nodded numbly. She linked arms with Sarah, who was holding her rapidly bruising cheek, and followed the broad shoulders of the man who had just saved her life. They moved through the mall corridors, not as fleeing victims, but as a protected entourage. A sleek, armored black Maybach idled illegally on the curb outside the south exit. Enzo opened the heavy rear door, ushering Carly and Sarah inside before taking the front passenger seat. Derek slid in beside Carly, the heavy door thudding shut with a satisfying, vault-like finality. "Drive," Derek instructed the chauffeur. "Beacon Hill, Take the underground route." As the massive vehicle smoothly pulled into the Boston traffic, the adrenaline finally began to drain from Carly's system, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She slumped against the luxurious leather seat, her chest shuddering with repressed sobs. Sarah leaned her head against the window, grimacing in pain. Derek opened a small refrigerated compartment nestled in the center console. He produced a bottle of chilled water, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to Carly. "Drink. You are going into shock." Carly took it, her hand shaking so badly that water spilled onto her lap. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a small sip. She turned her green eyes toward him, the fear slowly morphing into intense curiosity. "You knew who he was. You knew exactly who Arthur was. You called him out by name before you choked him." Derek rested his forearms on his knees, leaning forward slightly. The tinted windows cast dark, shifting shadows across his sharp jawline. "I know everything about Arthur Pendleton. More importantly, I know everything about you, Carly." Sarah sat up straight, wincing. "Wait, what? Are you some kind of stalker?" Enzo chuckled darkly from the front seat. "Miss, you have absolutely no idea who is sitting next to you, do you?" "Enough, Enzo," Derek commanded softly. He turned his attention back to Carly. 9 months ago, I was at a charity auction at the Hartford Plaza. I stepped out onto a terrace for some air. I saw what he did to you that night. I saw him throw you against the stone railing. Carly's breath hitched. Her hand instinctively went to her collarbone, remembering the fracture she had sustained that exact evening. "You were there? Why didn't you stop him?" "Because if I had stepped out of the shadows that night, Arthur wouldn't have survived the encounter, and you would have been dragged into a federal investigation," Derek explained, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, stating a violent fact with terrifying casualness. "I operate in a world that you do not belong in, Carly. But I couldn't forget your face. When you finally ran, I made sure your tracks were covered. I bought the gallery where you work. I ensured your apartment lease was approved. I have had men watching your street every single night to make sure he never found you." Carly's mind reeled. The invisible safety net she thought she had woven herself was actually a fortress built by this dangerous, magnetic stranger. "Who are you?" she asked again, the question carrying more weight this time. "My name is Derek Jordan." Sarah gasped loudly, her hand dropping from her bruised cheek. "Jordan? As in the Jordan Syndicate?" "Oh my God, Carly, he's the head of the Boston mob." Carly stiffened, pressing her back against the door. She had traded a domestic tyrant for a kingpin of organized crime. Derek didn't flinch at Sarah's blunt assessment. He simply watched Carly's reaction. "I am a lot of things, Carly. Most of them are unforgivable. But I am not a man who raises his hand to women. And as long as you are under my protection, Arthur Pendleton will never draw breath in your presence again." The Maybach descended into a private, heavily guarded subterranean garage beneath a towering luxury complex in Beacon Hill. Men armed with tactical rifles patrolled the concrete pillars, nodding respectfully as the vehicle rolled to a stop. "We are going upstairs," Derek announced. "I have a private physician waiting in my penthouse to look at your friend's face. After that, you will both eat. Then, we will discuss how to permanently remove Arthur from your life." High above the historic cobblestone streets of Boston, Derek's penthouse was a testament to untouchable wealth. It was a sprawling, minimalist space featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, commanding view of the Charles River. Modern art adorned the walls, but the atmosphere was far from welcoming. It felt like an elegant command center. Dr. Harrison, a discreet physician on the Jordan payroll, quickly and professionally tended to Sarah in a guest wing, prescribing a mild painkiller and applying a medical-grade cold compress to her cheek. Meanwhile, Derek stood in his private office, staring out at the city lights. Behind him, seated around a massive oak table, were his top lieutenants, Enzo, Thomas, and Victor. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and focused malice. "Pendleton is frantic," Thomas reported, reading from a secure, encrypted laptop. "He checked into the Ritz-Carlton under a fake name, but our guys made him immediately. He's been making phone calls for the last 2 hours. He tried calling the police commissioner." Derek didn't turn around. "And Commissioner Davies hung up on him the second Pendleton mentioned your name," Victor laughed harshly. "Told him to leave the state before he ends up in a landfill. Pendleton also tried reaching out to his board of directors in Hartford. He wants to liquidate his trust fund to hire private security." "Deny him that privilege," Derek ordered, finally turning to face his men. His eyes were cold, calculating pools of onyx. "Thomas, trigger the hostile takeover of Pendleton Holdings. I want his stocks completely bottomed out by the opening bell on Monday. Call our contacts at the regional banks. Tell them to freeze all his personal assets due to suspected wire fraud. We will manufacture the evidence later." Enzo leaned back, Jourdain his arms. "Boss, taking his money is one thing, but the man put his hands on your property. He hit the blonde girl. He traumatized Carly again. He needs to bleed." "He will," Derek said softly, walking over to the table and pouring a glass of bourbon. "But death is too quick for a man like Arthur. He built his entire identity on his wealth, his status, and his ability to make others feel small. I want to strip him naked. I want him to watch his empire crumble into dust. I want him completely isolated, bankrupt, and terrified. When he has absolutely nothing left, when he is begging for it all to end, then you can have him, Enzo." A dark, satisfied grin spread across Enzo's scarred face. "Understood. Set up a perimeter around the Ritz," Derek commanded, finishing his drink. "Do not let him leave Boston. But do not touch him yet. Let the financial ruin sink in first." As his men filed out of the office to execute the orders, Derek took a deep breath, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. He walked out of the office and down the long hallway, stopping in front of the master suite. He knocked twice before opening the heavy oak door. Carly was sitting on the edge of a massive, silk-sheeted bed, staring blankly at the Boston skyline. She had taken off her shoes, pulling her knees to her chest in a defensive posture. "Sarah is sleeping," Derek said quietly, stepping into the room but keeping a respectful distance. "The doctor said there's no orbital fracture, just a bad bruise." Carly turned her head. In the dim lighting of the bedroom, Derek looked less like a Mafia boss and more like a weary king. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Now you eat," Derek replied, gesturing to a silver tray resting on a nearby glass table. It held roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and a pot of chamomile tea. "You haven't eaten since this morning." Carly ignored the food. She stood up, smoothing down her cashmere sweater. "I mean, what happens to me, Derek? I traded one controlling man for another. You tracked me. You manipulated my life. You bought my workplace. How is this any different from a gilded cage?" Derek absorbed the accusation. He didn't defend himself, nor did he offer false apologies. He walked over to the tray, poured a cup of tea, and held it out to her. "Because the door is unlocked," Derek stated simply. Carly hesitated, then took the cup, her fingers brushing his once more. "I am a monster, Carly," Derek continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "I authorize violence every single day. I dismantle lives. But I never wanted to control you. I wanted to protect you because the world failed you. Arthur failed you. The law failed you." He took a step closer, towering over her. yet carefully keeping his hands firmly at his sides to prove he wasn't a threat. "If you want to leave tomorrow, Enzo will hand you a newly minted passport, a fresh identity, and $2 million in untraceable cash. You can go to Europe, Asia, anywhere you want, and my men will never look for you again. You will be completely free." Carly stared up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The offer was everything she had dreamed of while trapped in Connecticut. Absolute freedom. "And if I stay?" she whispered, her gaze locked onto his dark eyes. Derek's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. "If you stay under my name. You stay by my side. You will live in a world steeped in blood and shadow. But I swear to you on my life, no one will ever dare to disrespect you, hurt you, or touch a single hair on your head ever again. You will be untouchable." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged with a dangerous electric tension. Carly looked at the city lights, thinking of the terror she felt at the mall, and then looked back at the man who had torn that terror apart with his bare hands. Arthur had made her feel small, useless, and broken. Derek, for all his terrifying darkness, looked at her like she was the most valuable thing in his entire empire. She slowly set the teacup down on the table. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, entering the personal space of the most feared man on the East Coast. "I'm tired of running," Carly murmured, her voice steadying. She reached up, her small hand resting flat against the hard, muscular plane of his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, powerful, and suddenly beating just a fraction faster. "I want to watch him lose everything. I want him to know it was me who survived." Derek closed his eyes for a brief second, a heavy exhale escaping his lips as if he had been holding his breath since the moment he met her. He opened his eyes, all restraint vanishing, replaced by a fierce, consuming possessiveness. He slowly lifted his hand, his large fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing over the faint, old scar near her collarbone. "Then you will stay," Derek whispered, leaning down until his lips were a breath away from hers. "And Arthur Pendleton will learn exactly what it costs to touch what is mine." Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Beacon Hill penthouse, casting long, geometric shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Carly stood by the glass, a mug of black coffee warming her hands, looking down at the sprawling city. Boston looked peaceful from this altitude, entirely detached from the violent undercurrents that pulsed through its streets. She had slept surprisingly well. It was the first time in nearly 4 years that she hadn't woken up in a cold sweat, anticipating the heavy, suffocating sound of Arthur's footsteps outside her door. Here, surrounded by men who carried suppressed weapons beneath tailored suits, she ironically felt an absolute, impenetrable sense of safety. A soft groan drew her attention away from the window. Sarah was sitting up on the sprawling linen sofa in the adjacent lounge area, gingerly pressing a hand to her swollen cheek. The bruise had blossomed into a vivid mosaic of purple and yellow overnight. "Please tell me yesterday was a fever dream caused by bad mall sushi," Sarah mumbled, squinting at the bright sunlight. Carly walked over, setting her mug down on the glass coffee table. "It wasn't a dream. How is your face?" "Throbbing," Sarah admitted, accepting a glass of ice water Carly handed her. She looked around the cavernous, hyper-modern living space, her eyes widening as the memories of the previous day rushed back in. The armored car, the guns, the man who had nearly decapitated Arthur with one hand. "Carly, we are sitting in the penthouse of a Mafia boss. Do you understand that? Derek Jordan isn't just some rich guy with anger issues. I Googled him while you were asleep. He owns the ports. He owns half the real estate in the financial district. There are Reddit threads dedicating hundreds of pages to unsolved disappearances linked to his family. I know, Carly said quietly, sitting beside her friend. And you're okay with this? You just escaped one controlling psychopath. Are we seriously hiding behind a bigger, much more dangerous one? Before Carly could answer, the heavy double doors of the penthouse study swung open. Derek stepped out, flanked by Enzo and Thomas. He had traded his three-piece suit for a fitted black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, jagged scars. The casual attire did nothing to soften the lethal, commanding aura that surrounded him. "Good morning," Derek said, his dark eyes instantly locking onto Carly before shifting to Sarah. "Dr. Harrison left a topical ointment on the kitchen counter for the bruising. You should apply it." "Ah, thank you," Sarah squeaked, instantly intimidated, shrinking slightly into the sofa cushions. Derek dismissed his lieutenants with a subtle flick of his chin. Enzo and Thomas nodded silently, exiting the penthouse and locking the reinforced front door behind them. Derek walked over to the kitchen island, poured himself a cup of espresso, and leaned against the marble counter, watching Carly with an unreadable expression. "How is the financial district this morning?" Carly asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. A slow, predatory smirk touched the corner of Derek's mouth. He picked up a slim tablet from the counter and walked over, handing it to her. "See for yourself. Pendleton Holdings opened at $40 a share yesterday morning. As of 9:15 today, it is trading at 12 and plummeting fast." Carly stared at the screen. The red line on the graph was taking a literal nosedive. "How did you do this so quickly?" "Fear is a highly contagious disease in the corporate world," Derek explained, his voice low and smooth. "Thomas leaked fabricated, highly sensitive documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission last night, implying Arthur has been embezzling pension funds to cover illegal offshore gambling debts. We also intercepted his supply chain shipments in the Atlantic. His investors panicked. The board of directors held an emergency vote at dawn." Carly looked up, her heart hammering. "And?" "They ousted him," Derek said softly. "Arthur Pendleton is no longer the CEO of his own company. The banks have frozen his accounts pending the SEC investigation. His black cards are declining. He is currently trapped in a suite at the Ritz-Carlton, and by checkout time tomorrow, he won't even be able to afford the minibar." Sarah gasped. "You destroyed $1 billion empire before breakfast. I am dismantling a man who touched something that wasn't his," Derek corrected, his gaze never leaving Carly's face. "The money is just the opening act." A strange, dark thrill rushed through Carly's veins. For years, Arthur had used his bottomless bank accounts as a weapon against her. He had isolated her, tracked her, and legally trapped her, using expensive lawyers she could never afford to fight. To see that weapon completely neutralized, turned into ash by the man standing in front of her, felt entirely intoxicating. "He won't take this quietly," Carly warned, handing the tablet back. "Arthur is a narcissist. If he feels cornered, he lashes out. He thinks he is untouchable." "He was untouchable," Derek murmured, stepping closer until he was standing just inches from her knees. The scent of cedarwood and dark roasted coffee enveloped her. "Because he was playing by the rules of polite society. He is currently learning that polite society does not exist in my city. There is only me, and I have zero intention of being polite." Derek reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing the sleeve of Carly's sweater. "I have to oversee a shipment at the docks. Enzo will remain outside the door. Whatever you need, whatever you want to eat or wear, tell him. Do not approach the windows for too long, and do not answer any unknown numbers on your phone." Carly nodded, feeling the phantom heat of his touch long after he pulled his hand away. "Be careful." Derek paused, a flicker of genuine surprise breaking through his stoic facade. He had been told to be ruthless, to be decisive, and to be lethal. No one had told him to be careful in over a decade. "Always," he promised softly before turning and walking out the door. Across town, in the opulent but increasingly suffocating confines of the Ritz-Carlton, Arthur Pendleton hurled a crystal tumbler against the wall. It shattered into 100 glittering pieces, spraying amber liquor across the expensive floral wallpaper. "What do you mean? Access denied," Arthur screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he gripped his cell phone. His blonde hair, usually perfectly styled, was a greasy, disheveled mess. His custom navy suit was wrinkled, the collar of his shirt stained with sweat. "I am Arthur Pendleton. My family practically built that bank. You unfreeze those assets right now, or I will sue you into the Stone Age. Mr. Pendleton, please lower your voice." The bank manager's tired voice crackled over the speaker. "I have explained this 3 times. The freeze order came directly from federal regulators. It is entirely out of our hands. Furthermore, due to the pending investigation, the bank has decided to sever its relationship with you. A cashier's check for your remaining liquid funds, once cleared by the SEC, will be mailed to your legal residence. Good day." The line went dead. Arthur let out a guttural roar of frustration, throwing the phone onto the plush, king-sized bed. He paced the length of the suite like a caged, rabid animal. His neck was heavily bruised, a terrifying ring of dark purple fingerprints serving as a constant, agonizing reminder of the humiliation he had suffered at the mall. He walked over to the laptop sitting on the desk. The financial news sites were all running the same damning headline: Pendleton Holdings in freefall. CEO ousted amidst embezzlement scandal. "Lies," Arthur muttered frantically, raking his hands through his hair. "It's all fabricated. Someone set me up." His mind raced, piecing together the fragmented, chaotic events of the last 24 hours. He had found Carly. He had her right in his grasp. And then, that monster in the suit had materialized out of thin air. Jordan. Arthur had heard the whispers in the exclusive country clubs of Connecticut. The Jordan Syndicate, an organization so deeply embedded in the East Coast infrastructure that the FBI considered them a permanent fixture rather than a target. Arthur had always scoffed at the rumors, believing that old money corporate wealth always trumped street-level organized crime. He was rapidly realizing how fatally wrong he was. Jordan didn't just operate on the streets, he operated in the shadows of the boardrooms, pulling invisible strings that had completely unraveled Arthur's life in a single night. Why, Arthur thought, staring wildly at his reflection in the mirror. Why would the head of the Boston mob care about a pathetic, boring woman like Carly? It didn't matter. What mattered was getting his property back. Arthur's ego could not comprehend defeat. He couldn't accept that Carly had somehow secured the protection of a god among criminals. In Arthur's twisted, narcissistic reality, Carly belonged to him. She was his punching bag, his trophy, his plaything. He was going to get her back, and then he was going to make her suffer for every single dollar she had cost him today. He snatched his phone off the bed and scrolled past the ignored calls from his former lawyers, dialing a burner number he kept for dealing with union disputes at his warehouses. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff, heavy-breathing voice answered. "Yeah? Jimmy," Arthur snapped, pacing back toward the window. "It's Arthur Pendleton, Jimmy Rat." Collins chuckled, the sound wet and unpleasant. Well, well, if it ain't the disgraced King of Hartford, seeing your name all over the news today, boss. Looks like you stepped in some serious crap." "Shut up and listen to me," Arthur hissed. "I need you in Boston, today. Bring your tools and bring a couple of your discreet guys. Boston? Jimmy whistled. That's Jordan territory, Mr. Pendleton. You don't just waltz into Boston carrying hardware without paying the toll. People end up in the harbor for that. I don't care whose territory it is, Arthur yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. I will pay you triple your usual rate, 100 grand in cash, half up front, the rest when the job is done. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the greed clearly warring with the fear. All right. What's the job? My wife is hiding somewhere in the city, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing, fixing on the Boston skyline. I need you to track her down, and when you find her, I need you to quietly grab her and bring her to me. Anyone who gets in your way, anyone who tries to stop you, you eliminate them. 100 grand to grab a fleeing housewife. Consider it done, boss. We'll be on the interstate in an hour. Arthur hung up the phone, a twisted, vicious smile finally breaking through his panic. Jordan might control the banks, he might control the boardrooms, but Arthur had just unleashed a pack of hungry street dogs. What Arthur didn't know, however, as he poured himself another glass of bourbon from the hotel minibar, was that his encrypted phone call hadn't bounced off a generic cell tower. It had been intercepted, recorded, and decrypted by a surveillance van parked directly across the street from the Ritz-Carlton. 5 minutes later, the audio file was sitting in Derek Jordan's secure inbox at the shipping docks. Derek stood on the cold, wind-swept pier, the salty air of the Atlantic whipping at his black coat. He pressed play on his encrypted smartphone, listening to Arthur's desperate, pathetic order. Enzo stood beside him, watching the boss's expression. When the recording finished, Derek didn't yell. He didn't break his phone. The temperature around him just seemed to drop another 10 degrees. He hired Jimmy Collins, Enzo noted, shaking his head in absolute disgust. A low-rent loan shark from Hartford. Pendleton is dumber than I thought. Pendleton is drowning, Derek corrected, slipping the phone back into his coat pocket. And drowning men will grab onto any piece of floating trash they can find. Do we intercept Collins on the highway? Enzo asked, unbuttoning his jacket to check the harness of his weapon. We can run his van off the road before he even hits the city limits. No, Derek said softly, his dark eyes staring out at the freezing, churning waters of the harbor. Let him come into the city. Let him think he has a chance. We are going to use Jimmy Collins to send a message to Arthur. A message so loud it will shatter what little sanity he has left. Derek turned away from the water, his posture rigid with lethal intent. Double the guard at the penthouse. Move Carly and her friend away from the exterior walls. It's time to show Mr. Pendleton what happens when you try to wage war in my city. Headlights cut through the dense, freezing fog rolling off Boston Harbor as a rusted, unmarked cargo van crossed the city limits. Inside, Jimmy Rat Collins drummed his thick fingers against the steering wheel, a smug grin plastered across his unshaven face. Beside him sat 3 heavy hitters from the Hartford underworld, men who cracked skulls for a living and asked 0 questions. They were armed, fueled by the promise of Arthur Pendleton's massive payout, and entirely arrogant. I got a buddy over at Sullivan and Associates Investigations on Boylston Street, Jimmy told his crew, tossing a burner phone onto the dashboard. Cost me 10 grand from Pendleton's advance, but he pinged the girl's cell phone. She's not hiding in some high-rise. She's holed up in a renovated warehouse over in the Seaport district. Fargo Street Transit Depot. Easy grab. What about this Jordan guy? A thug in the back grunted, racking the slide of his pistol. Urban legend, Jimmy scoffed, turning the steering wheel sharply. These East Coast kingpins sit in their glass towers and let their accountants do the fighting. When we kick the door in and grab the blonde, there won't be anyone there but dust. We do this quick, hand her over to the rich boy at the Ritz, and we're back in Connecticut by midnight. They navigated the labyrinth of industrial roads, pulling up to an isolated, dimly lit warehouse at the edge of the water. The massive rusted doors were chained shut, but a side pedestrian entrance sat slightly ajar, a single yellow bulb flickering above it. Jimmy signaled his men. They killed the engine, slipped out of the van, and drew their weapons. They moved with practiced efficiency, stacking up by the steel door. Jimmy kicked it open, his gun raised, fully expecting to find a terrified Carly cowering in a corner. Instead, he stepped into absolute, suffocating darkness. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, operated by an unseen mechanism. The van outside suddenly exploded into a ball of blinding orange fire, the concussive wave rattling the warehouse windows. "What the hell?" Jimmy screamed, panic instantly seizing his throat as the glow from the burning van cast long, dancing shadows through the dirty glass panes. High-intensity floodlights suddenly snapped on from the catwalks above, blinding Jimmy and his men. They raised their hands to shield their eyes, wildly aiming their guns at the ceiling. "Drop the weapons!" The voice echoed from the far end of the warehouse. It was calm, lethal, absolute. As Jimmy's vision adjusted to the harsh light, his blood turned to ice. They weren't alone. Standing in a semicircle around them were at least 20 men, dressed in dark tactical gear, holding suppressed automatic rifles aimed directly at their chests. Walking slowly into the center of the kill box was Lorenzo Enzo Bianchi. The jagged scar on his jaw seemed to glow under the floodlights. He stopped 30 feet away, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. He wasn't even holding a gun. "Sullivan and Associates," Enzo chuckled darkly, taking a drag of his cigarette. "Did you really think a back-alley PI could ping a phone owned by the Jordan Syndicate without us handing him the exact coordinates we wanted him to find?" Jimmy swallowed hard, his knees suddenly shaking. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble with your family. We were just hired to—" "I know exactly what you were hired to do." Derek's baritone voice sliced through the air. From the shadows behind Enzo, Derek Jordan emerged. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't look like an urban legend. He looked like the devil himself, walking on solid concrete. "Drop the weapons," Derek repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it commanded the entire cavernous room. One by one, the heavy thuds of steel hitting concrete echoed as Jimmy's crew eagerly surrendered their guns. Jimmy dropped his last, dropping to his knees, his arrogant bravado completely evaporating. "Mr. Jordan, please," Jimmy begged, sweat pouring down his face. "Pendleton told us she was just his runaway wife. He didn't tell us she was under your protection. We'll leave. We'll give back the money." Derek walked forward until the toes of his polished leather shoes were inches from Jimmy's kneecaps. He stared down at the trembling street thug with an expression of utter, hollow detachment. "Arthur Pendleton sent a pack of rabid dogs into my city to put their filthy hands on the woman I love," Derek stated, the word love hanging in the frigid air, heavy with a terrifying, permanent finality. "If I killed you, it would be a mercy. But Arthur needs to understand exactly what happens when he forces my hand." Derek gestured to Enzo. "Break their hands, all of them. Make sure they can never hold a weapon again. Then, put Mr. Collins in a cab. He has a message to deliver." Jimmy screamed as Enzo's men stepped forward, wielding heavy iron pipes stripped from the warehouse walls. Derek didn't flinch at the sound of shattering bone. He simply turned his back and walked out into the freezing fog, ready to deliver the final killing blow to the King of Hartford. Arthur Pendleton paced the length of his suite at the Ritz-Carlton until the soles of his shoes felt hot. He checked his diamond-encrusted watch for the 50th time. It was past midnight. Jimmy should have called by now. He walked over to the mahogany minibar, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unscrew the cap off a fresh bottle of bourbon. His life was unraveling at a terrifying speed. The news networks were running non-stop coverage of the Pendleton Holdings embezzlement scandal. His lawyers had officially stopped answering his emails, citing a conflict of interest directly related to their fear of the Jordan syndicate. Arthur took a long, burning swig directly from the bottle. "Stupid girl," he muttered to the empty room. "She caused all of this. When Jimmy brings her here, I am going to—" A heavy, frantic pounding on the suite door made Arthur jump, spilling bourbon onto his wrinkled shirt. He froze. The knocking was desperate, accompanied by a muffled, pathetic whimpering. Jimmy, Arthur thought, a wild surge of triumph rushing through his veins. He got her. Arthur practically ran to the door, unlocking the heavy deadbolt and throwing it open. "Did you—" The words died in his throat. Jimmy Rat Collins stood in the hallway, but he was entirely alone. His face was a bruised, bloody mess. His arms hung limply at his sides, both of his wrists bent at horrifying, unnatural angles, completely shattered. Tears streamed down the loan shark's dirty cheeks. "Jimmy, what the hell happened?" Arthur backed away, horrified. "Where is my wife?" Jimmy stumbled into the room, collapsing onto the expensive plush carpet. He looked up at Arthur with a mixture of agony and pure, unfiltered hatred. "You're a dead man," Jimmy sobbed, coughing up blood onto the floor. "You sent us into a meat grinder, Pendleton. Jordan was waiting for us." Arthur's stomach plummeted into a bottomless abyss. "Jordan? No, you were supposed to be discreet." Jimmy awkwardly maneuvered his body, using his forearms to push a crumpled, blood-stained envelope out of his jacket pocket onto the floor. "Jordan said... He said to give you this, and to tell you the game is over." Arthur stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. He slowly bent down, his hands trembling, and picked it up. He tore the flap open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stock paper. Written in elegant fountain pen script were 3 words. "Look out the window." Before Arthur could even process the message, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet night. It wasn't just one siren, it was dozens. Arthur dropped the note and sprinted to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Boston streets, his jaw unhinged in absolute, paralyzing horror. Pulling up to the front entrance of the Ritz-Carlton were 6 black SUVs with flashing red and blue lights, accompanied by 3 Boston Police Department cruisers. Heavily armed federal agents were swarming out of the vehicles, locking down the perimeter of the hotel. Reporters and news vans were already arriving on the scene, tipping off by an anonymous source. "No," Arthur gasped, stumbling backward until he hit the edge of the bed. "No, this is a mistake. I have money. I have power." A thunderous crash shattered the door to his suite. Splinters of wood flew across the room. 5 tactical agents flooded in, their weapons raised, blinding flashlights cutting through the dim lighting of the hotel room. "Arthur Pendleton," a federal marshal barked, stepping over the weeping Jimmy Collins. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. Get on the ground, now!" Arthur didn't move. He was frozen, his mind completely broken by the sheer scale of his destruction. He had spent his entire life untouchable, protected by his family's legacy. In less than 48 hours, Derek Jordan had stripped him of his company, his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. "I said get down," the marshal yelled, grabbing Arthur by his collar and violently sweeping his legs out from under him. Arthur hit the floor hard, the breath leaving his lungs in a painful rush. As the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists, locking him into a cage he would likely never escape, he finally realized the terrifying truth. Carly didn't just run away. She had walked into the arms of a titan, and that titan had crushed Arthur like an insect. Miles away, in the hushed, serene warmth of the Beacon Hill penthouse, Carly sat on the edge of the massive sofa. The television was on, muted. The breaking news ticker flashed in bright red letters at the bottom of the screen. Arthur Pendleton, arrested in Boston's hotel room, faces decades in federal prison. She watched the footage of Arthur, disheveled, broken, and crying, being frog-marched out of the hotel by federal agents, while camera flashes exploded around him. The heavy oak door to the study opened, and Derek walked in. He had shed his overcoat and suit jacket, the sleeves of his black shirt rolled up. He walked over to the sofa, pausing just behind her, his eyes fixed on the television screen. "It's done," Derek said softly, his deep voice wrapping around her like a protective shield. "The federal prosecutors have the fabricated ledger. The SEC has his bank accounts. He will never breathe free air again. You are safe, Carly. Completely, permanently safe." Carly didn't look away from the screen immediately. A profound, heavy weight that she had carried on her chest for 4 agonizing years, finally, completely evaporated. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting sweeter than it ever had before. She picked up the remote and clicked the television off. The screen went black, plunging the room into a quiet intimacy. Carly stood up and turned to face the monster who had become her savior. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Derek stepped closer, bridging the final gap between them. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away a single tear that managed to escape. "You never have to thank me for protecting my own soul, Carly." Carly leaned into his touch, wrapping her arms around his waist, resting her head against the solid wall of his chest. She listened to the steady, powerful thud of his heartbeat. She knew she was standing in the center of a dark, violent world, wrapped in the arms of a dangerous man. But as Derek held her tight, resting his chin on the top of her head, Carly finally knew she was exactly where she belonged. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the queen of the shadows. What a chilling and satisfying end to Carly's terrifying journey. Arthur learned the ultimate lesson. When you push a woman into the dark, you better pray she doesn't find a monster willing to fight for her in the shadows. Derek Jordan didn't just save Carly. He unleashed the ultimate karma, tearing Arthur's empire to shreds and securing her a crown in his dark world. If this intense Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat with its twisted drama and explosive justice, you won't want to miss our next epic story. Drop a comment below and tell us what you thought of Derek's brutal revenge plan. Did Arthur get exactly what he deserved? Hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends who love a dark romance thriller, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more heart-stopping, twist-filled dramatic audio narratives every week.